From the Fathead Studio in Speedway, Indiana, this is The Skinny.
Man, am I still pretty? And he's like, you ain't pretty, but you're going to be all right.
And now I'm just hanging on, looking at the wall, like flying this way. And I'm like, oh man, I got to let go of this thing at some point.
And then there's one that could literally pick you up.
Yeah.
It's
I'm not really sure about that, but yeah.
That's called a helicopter.
Well,
And the last lap was just chaos. I mean, like 4 wide, 5 wide.
It's like whatever, if you land it and send it into the fence, you're probably not gonna get hurt. Bounce, and then this insane roll, the car that Keegan was in. I mean, I don't know, it's the shape of the Beetle or what, but that thing sent it.
So I was the supercharger specialist on my old man's car with
Specialist?
Yeah, it sounds cooler than crew guy.
Hi, I'm Tony Stewart.
I'm Mario Andretti.
I'm Christy Lee.
I'm Alexander Rossi.
I'm Cruz Pedregon.
I'm Allen Bestwick. This is The Skinny.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to The Skinny. We have a great guest that will join us in the studio here today. I'm Ken Stout. The big man is Rico Elmore. Michael Young back behind the controls. This is also a very good friend of his as well. The smooth tones and the melodic voice of one of the outstanding broadcasters of our time has joined us here in the booth. No, I'm not nervous at all that he's better than I am at my job, but he quite possibly is. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Allen Bestwick.
You're saying all that stuff. I'm waiting for somebody else to walk through the door. I'm saying, oh, who's coming today?
Is there another guest coming?
Yeah, come on. Thanks. I appreciate that.
Hey, man, thanks for coming in here. You're truly one of the best, and there's no question about it. It's not hype or anything like that to make you feel uncomfortable, but there's a few people that make it to the level. A few people that make it to that level that you're at, and you've managed to sustain. And one of the big things, I think, big misnomers maybe for the people that are out there watching and listening, is not understanding how volatile this industry is at being a broadcaster, and being at the top of any game, I guess, that probably holds true to a large degree. But man, you've got to bob and weave in this industry if you're going to stay in the game, and it's very, very difficult, and you've managed to do so for a long time, so congrats.
I appreciate that. I've been very fortunate. Won't be shy about saying I've worked hard. I do work at what I do. But I've been very fortunate. I've been blessed to be part of. Nobody makes television alone. Nobody makes radio alone. You know, the way that we do racing radio. And I've been just part of some wonderful teams over the years that have made me look awfully good.
You know, when I was doing some homework on you, I noticed the one thing that jumped out at me. I believe you started off when you were about 15 years old in high school, and you. First of all, the fact that you knew you wanted to do that, or at least it was intriguing, was surprising, because I know at 15 years old I was clueless about what I was going to do.
I definitely wasn't really career oriented at that point in time. So,
but you moved up the ladder very quickly. I mean, clearly your voice is good. That's always a key factor, and people think that's 90% of the job when it's about 10% of the job. But you obviously were doing your homework. You delivered nicely. You sounded great. You did what you needed to do. But man, you escalated very, very quickly, it seems.
Lucky breaks, right place, right time.
Timing. I thought about that. Was what I thought of, timing.
You know, how did I get to MRN? Well, I actually had given up being on the air because I didn't think I was good enough.
Wow.
And I was working in a job where I was a program salesman, selling radio programs for one of the national radio networks. I was at the NAB Radio Convention, Dallas, Texas, and I ran into the guy that was running MRN at the convention, who I knew from Stafford Speedway, when I worked at a local radio station, and he was the PR guy at Stafford, right?
How long ago?
That's 1985. And I run into him, and we struck up a nice conversation, and my most important client walked into the room, general manager of KTRH in Houston. And I said, John, love to talk racing with you for another 4 hours. I got to go. And I guess that resonated. And like 3 months later, he called me and said, we've got a job coming open down here at MRN. Would you fly down and interview for it? And the first job I took at MRN was not on the air. It was to sell MRN to radio stations, which is what I was doing in D.C. Well, let's see. Washington, D.C., Daytona Beach, Florida. Yeah, I can do that.
Let me think about that.
And, you know, and that lucky break led to, hey, we're short a pit reporter this weekend. Jump in. Which led to the next and the next and the next. So I gave up because I wasn't good enough. And it kind of came back to me.
So I want to go back a little bit further. At age 16, your father's racing at a place called Seekonk. Is that
Yep.
how it's pronounced?
Yep.
Seekonk Speedway. As a young man, were you not? I would think you'd want to chase Dad's path and drive a race car. Instead, you end up announcing at that speedway.
Yeah, I did. So there's a gap between Dad's racing and my being old enough to race. So my dad had a race car in the late 60s, early 70s. Second division, quarter-mile racetrack. You know, a 1952 and a half Studebaker Lark pulled out of the junkyard, fixed up with him and his old Army buddies, and they went and they won some races.
Oh, that's awesome.
It was fun. So when I was, yay high, the car was kept in the one-bay garage of our ranch home in a suburban neighborhood. And
Neighbors had to love that.
they did, yeah.
Pretty big.
Sometimes I've heard stories in later years, but everybody had good humor about it because at that time, right, every gas station around had a race car sitting in the garage or. So, okay, time to bleed the brakes. Well, Alan, jump in the car. Pump it up, hold it. Okay, pump it up, hold, right? So I was around it from a young age and learned to love the sport. Gap that. Now I'm 16 years old, and my dad and I are at the races at the same track. And I've started to do some disc jockeying and local radio, things like that. And we run into the promoter. And legendary guy in the business, name is D. Anthony Vendetti. And my dad stops him. Mr. Vendetti, Allen Bestwick, remember me, 37 juniors? Oh, yeah. This is my son, Alan. He wants to be an announcer. Oh, yeah? Were you done any? Well, I work, football games, disc jockey, this. Follow me. We march up the stairs to the tower of Seekonk Speedway. He taps the longtime announcer on the shoulder. Guy's name was Jim Powers. We called him Reverend Jim. He said, let the kid do the street stocks. First race I ever called.
Want to get the skinny on other guests and different types of motorsports? Check out our YouTube page and get the skinny. The Skinny is brought to you by Fatheads Eyewear. Fatheads Eyewear, hardcore since '04. And American Coach. Innovation is our life force.
Welcome back to the Fatheads Eyewear Studio here in Speedway, Indiana. This is The Skinny. We have Allen Bestwick on the show with us here this week, an outstanding broadcaster, award-winning broadcaster at the highest levels of the game, talking about how he got started in his career. And one of the names that jumped out at me, because he's out of the Northeast, born in Rhode Island, and spent a fair amount of time up there, that was the land of the modifieds. Mm-hmm. And one of the guys up there that knew the modifieds inside and out was a guy by the name of Charlie Roberts.
Yeah.
And Charlie Roberts was a really good friend of mine. I remember I was just getting into the industry, and he sent me in to do some interviews at the Waldorf when the NASCAR drivers came in for the McDonald's Motorsports Report. So that was the very beginning for me, very, very beginning. I was working at a drag strip called Englishtown, and had met Charlie there, and he sent me off to do that report. It was my first time interviewing Dale Earnhardt, and I've told the story once or twice, at least to these guys here. First time I had done anything like this, and I had this little recorder and a microphone, and I'm clueless, and all of these reporters are just sharks, man, digging. Yeah. And I see everybody gathered around. They had the top 10 drivers in one room, and I see everybody gathered around Earnhardt. And I'm like, oh, well, I'll just wait till the crowd dies down, and I'll go back later. And I literally went over. I think Labonte had won the championship. I think I got an interview with Labonte, no problem. And I'm still waiting to get this interview at the very end of the night from Earnhardt. And the crowd, of course, has never died down. So they are literally about to make everybody leave. And they said, get your last interview. So I walk in the back, and I'm in the back of this crowd. I mean, I'm telling you, I had to be 7 deep. And Earnhardt literally looks out over this crowd, and he says, stick your microphone up in here. Come on in. And I didn't know who he was talking to. I'm like, he certainly isn't talking to me. I mean, he can barely even see me. Yeah. So, but he said, no, you stick your microphone up in here. But he caught the greenest guy in the room and was willing to help him out. And I did, and I got my interview, and we went back down to where they had the stage, and they were handing out the awards, and I was in the back of the room because I had no chair. And I was standing at the bar having a beer, and here comes Earnhardt. Stands right beside me, has a beer, and we stand there and chat. He was just a wonderful human being.
He, for someone with no high school diploma, limited formal education, he was one of the smartest people ever. just had a common sense. Now, my reaction to your story is, first of all, that's Dale, right? And it served two purposes. He knew you were waiting around to try and get him. He didn't want to stay around any longer than the rest of this thing. Get in here, get what you need with the rest of the group, because I'm leaving. And he didn't want you sitting there saying, yeah, Earnhardt stiffed me. You know?
Yeah. You know who he taught that well to was Tony Stewart, because he's the same way. Come on, if we're going to talk about it, let's go.
Stop and understand.
Yep.
What do you need? What do I need out of this? Let's make it all work together. And they're just really smart about that stuff. And so you got what you wanted instead of leaving there and having to go back and answer to Charlie that, no, I didn't really get anything. You know?
Right.
And you learned something.
I got everybody except for this one guy.
Yeah.
One guy drives his black car.
You learned something from the greatest, right? He's, come on, let's go. This is what you do here. You jump in, right?
I was just so impressed because clearly he didn't have to take the time to do that. But it showed a lot of who he really was.
And again, he knows he can see it in your eyes. And it served his purpose too. Because he wasn't going to give you that interview all by yourself later on.
So what was your interaction with at Motor? Was it MotorNet, I believe it was called? With Charlie Roberts. Was that the beginning of your career or towards the front of it?
First full-time job I had in radio was a radio station in Norwich, Connecticut. And there's a guy by the name of Brian Buckhour who worked with Charlie on what was then the Skoll Motorsports Report. Charlie had this idea. Charlie was track announcer at Wall Stadium in New Jersey, had this idea to syndicate a radio show about racing, but not just about national racing, about local racing. And they put this studio together in the Grange of the old Grange building in Farmingdale, New Jersey, which is like an hour and change outside of New York. And Charlie's dad was a brilliant businessman, and he put together the sponsorship deal with then Skoll. So they started this thing, and they had this program carried on like 300 radio stations. Did 5 different editions of it, so you could include results from different parts of the country. I'm working at this radio station in Connecticut. Brian Buckhour gets a job. He's going to go to work for Dover Speedway. And so they got a job opening. And somebody calls me and says, hey, you need to apply for this. So I applied for it and drove down to Farmingdale and interviewed with Charlie, and he hired me. So I packed my wife and my then very young son up and moved to Farmingdale, New Jersey. And, you know, we would cover races and do all, make these shows every day. And the show went out. If you could have seen, well, you saw the setup, but the setup was a stack, like where these things are behind me, they would be shelves of telephone answering machines. No internet, no just put a file together.
Yeah.
So every radio station had one of these like 10 phone numbers that they dialed into and recorded the program off the answering machine over the telephone at their convenience and then played it back when they wanted to. So the quality of the show was just a telephone call in those days, right?
Yeah.
But it was phenomenal. Feel that energy swell up while those drivers are sitting in the car, and every team strategist and crew member is their guts like this, and they're trying not to let the emotion get to them because they got to go to work. It's just awesome.
We're back here at the Fatheads Eyewear Studio in Speedway, Indiana, just about 10 minutes or so from the Speedway, where this man spends a lot of time. Allen Bestwick in the studio with us, and just a few weeks ago, he was over there at the Speedway on a daily basis, calling all of the action for the 107th running of the Indianapolis 500. A dream job?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, without question. I can remember being in elementary school. And, they'd have the little book flyers that you'd get where you could buy a book. And I want to say maybe, 3rd grade, 4th grade, whatever it was, the book 30 Days in May, the story of the Indianapolis 500 was in that flyer. And I bought the paperback. Had a little green paper cover and all. I dog-eared that book. I must have read that book 100 times from cover to cover to cover. And, look, we're in Rhode Island. The guys racing at our quarter-mile Seekonk Speedway, those were the racing gods to us. Indianapolis, Daytona, oh, those are mystical places I'll never see in my life, right? Sitting there watching my favorite race car of all time, the Johnny Lightning Special, Al Unser, 1970. Wide World of Sports at that time, right? Wasn't even the Sunday night telecast. Oh, my God, that would be the coolest thing ever to see a car like that race. It happened. Can't explain really how, but it happened.
Yeah, it's
So how did the call come
For
for the job?
I was doing ESPN's NASCAR broadcasts for a number of years. Had already been through NBC and MRN and TN. I've been through a lot of them. TNN and all the rest. The
Don't
TNT.
forget the Skull Hour.
Yeah, that too.
TBS.
And the executive in charge of racing at ESPN came to me and he said, "Hey, we'd like you to do our IndyCar stuff now too." Wow. Okay. And you know, I've been coming here for a long time. I mean, I was here at that first NASCAR tire test they had, and all the Brickyard 400s and all that kind of thing. Had called the Brickyard 400 since, 2001 when NBC took it over. All right, well, it's the same booth. It's the same racetrack. It's the same. It's not the same.
It's not the same.
It's not the same. That Sunday morning was just like, okay.
It'll bring you to tears.
This is different, right?
Yeah.
This is different. And the last 15 minutes before the green flag, right? It's just so special. And I'm standing there, and what's going through my head? I'm about to call the Indianapolis freaking 500. Can you believe this?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And then the race starts and you focus in. Well, I had spent time in the booth that week, and NASCAR comes down the straightaway. If they're side by side and fender to fender, you got time to call the finish. You're going to see those cars. You know, where we were at the time, we were on the second floor of the pagoda. You don't see that much of the racetrack. But you got time to look out the window and pick up the leaders and see who gets to that little stripe first. I spent time in the booth watching practice and seeing where the draft happened. Like, okay, I'm not going to screw this finish up. And that comes by quick. You know, so it all happens a lot faster. But once the race started and you settled in, it's like, okay, we're all good. And but it was, I'm about to call the Indianapolis 500. A kid from Rhode Island. Who'd have thought?
Right. I'm with you. I've said this many times. I'm curious if you can do it. I'm certainly not capable of it, but I've often said there are no words to explain the pageantry and the emotion 30 minutes before that race starts. I just don't know how to describe it to somebody properly. You can feel it. It's in the air. You can cut it.
It puts on display what the place and the race and the history and those formalities and traditions mean to people. You know, where we are, we can look out of the windows in the pagoda and we can see people in the grandstands. We can see tears running down people's faces. My dad was in the military for 28 years. Taps, to me, has a meaning, and it's not a good meaning. So when I hear taps, I think how fortunate I am that my dad never had that song played for him.
Right.
You know, the Back Home Again. I'm not from Indiana, but man, I get it. You know, what this race means to this community, and watching, here's the Purdue Marching Band and here's Jim Cornelison, and you just feel that energy swell up while those drivers are sitting in the car, and every team strategist and crew member is their guts like this, and they're trying not to let the emotion get to them because they got to go to work. It's just awesome. Cool. You know, I mean,
it was like nothing you ever seen or heard
and you
there.
were just speechless. Like, okay, I just saw something I never thought I'd see.
Welcome back to the Skinny. Allen Bestwick in the studio with us, just going over some of the theatrics that happen on the big day here in May during the Indianapolis 500. And we were just chatting off air. You were talking about Lambeau, how you park in people's yards, and we kind of take it all for granted around here. But all the houses at Speedway, Indiana, which is where our studios are, it's its own little town, and this place comes to life with 300,000 fans that will be inside of that spectacular facility.
And a well-kept town.
Yes,
You know what
yeah.
I mean? A hard
It's
working.
blue collar, but the yards are
work.
nice. The houses are nice. I mean, it's in its own right a very special place.
Yeah.
And you mentioned it before. I mean, you'll see somebody's yard that has 10 cars in it because there's no place to park.
Yeah, if you're the first guy in, you're not leaving early. By the way.
That's exactly right.
But one of the things that's always impressed me about Indianapolis since I started coming here, you can, and I had a conversation with the guy that used to run Michigan Speedway just the other day and talk about, we're trying to get 140,000 people in on one 2-lane road and out. And one of the things I always loved about Indianapolis is it might have been 300,000 people, but there's 18 ways to send cars away from that speedway. And if you knew where to park, you could get to the airport and make your flight.
What a special place. What a special town. This place just really comes to life. And people build their vacations around this in the summer and come here and spend a couple of weeks.
Yeah. I spend 21 nights here in May. I was here for the test. 21 nights here. I'm back for the Brickyard Week, back for the IMSA Week. It's almost like a second home. And, the way the community embraces the event, you don't find that in a lot of places about a lot of events. Lambeau Field's a great example, but the way that the community embraces the 500, it's just different, and it's great.
Yeah, so you were here for the tire test for NASCAR. That what, 93,
92,
right?
yeah.
92?
Yep.
Okay. I was working for Coca-Cola at the time.
In the Coke lot.
I was not in the lot. I was
Just
actually
checking.
I was in a truck.
Just check it.
But close enough.
Yeah.
But they were loading my truck because I worked at a different facility. They were loading my truck. And I said, man, they're doing something over there at that track. Well, it was a Coca-Cola track at the time, which it needs to go back to, Roger. Coca-Cola track at the time. And I walk over in my Coke uniform. Nobody says anything. I'm roaming through the garage.
Carte blanche.
Whatever I want. Rusty's here, and everybody's there. And I was like, what are they thinking of running these things out here? Because and I've loved racing all my life. Much of the same story growing up in it. But it was absolutely hilarious because I'm walking through there and I'm thinking, well, they don't run this stuff out here, and it's like sacrilegious, right? And but it was so cool. But I wish we could get back to a little more of the luster of that it used to be there, because it's a great facility to hold any event.
Yeah.
And figuring out that, but yeah, it was cool. So I was there at that tire test. It's funny.
It was an impressive atmosphere. And again, another one of those moments, right? I'm a guy whose career took him to NASCAR, working for MRN at that time, NASCAR's radio network. I'll never call a race there. Not so fast.
Right.
Don't be so sure. So,
well, quickly, Alan, you could talk on this, what it meant to the NASCAR drivers, that tire test and then that first Brickyard 400. It meant a lot to those. They thought, just like you, we're never going to be able to run at Indianapolis.
Well, same thing. And for so many years, the rivalry between the racing, well, if you're an IndyCar fan, you can't like NASCAR. And if you're a NASCAR fan, you can't like Indy. Well, why? I never understood that. It's like, I'm a fan of anything that races.
Yeah.
Because I like racing.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
And I think most people are like that. I know the racers are like that. But there were the politics of pride at work, right? NASCAR was on the rise. And the Speedway, because of the split, was in a bit of a defensive posture. But common sense prevailed. Hey, we've got the greatest race course in the world. And no, it's not the kind of cars we're used to running here, but we got some great racing and some great race car drivers. Let's take a shot. I'll bet people will love it.
I remember how loud they were and how everybody was like, oh my God, did you hear these things?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was.
So we raced in Michigan on the weekend, and then we all came over here on Monday, and I think they went on the track Tuesday and Wednesday. And walking in the place with an actual credential. Wow. And walking through Gasoline Alley out to Pit Road, and the people that were there. I mean, it's like 9 o'clock in the morning, right? And the noise, there's not even anything going on yet, and just the buzz from the people was so awesome. And the first time those cars came roaring down the front straightaway, you just stood there and you said, cool. You know, I mean,
it was like nothing you ever seen or
yeah,
heard
you were
there.
just speechless. Like,
Yeah.
okay, I just saw something I never thought I'd see. He said yes, he minded having lunch, or yes, that he would.
That's the way I read it.
The Skinny is brought to you by American Coach. American Coach, innovation is our life force. And Fatheads Eyewear. Fatheads Eyewear, hardcore since '04.
We have Allen Bestwick in the studio with us here. This is The Skinny. I'm Ken Stout. The big man over there, that's Rico Elmore. He put this entire thing together. Also the president behind Fatheads Eyewear.
I'm blushing.
Yeah, I know, embarrassing you. And then, of course, Michael Young. And Michael Young, you spent a lot of time with Allen. You and Allen are out there. I mean, seriously, we touched on the top of the show, but you two are the guys we hear every morning right off the bat when we're out there testing.
It's interesting. Talk about Allen and I's road. We're quite similar. I'm a guy from Delphus, Ohio, a small town, and never thought I'd ever be able to do anything like this, and started working radio and just covering the track, and got that lucky break and was able to take advantage of it. Same with being on the public address. But it has been it's interesting, of all the people that I've worked with, Allen is the most unique of all, in that I can say something and I think it comes out so intellectual, and Allen, you can wax so much more poetic. I don't know how you do it. It's amazing how you take a thought, you can quickly process it and come up with a whole nother train of thought and explain what it is that at least came out of my mouth. It's something.
Well, my father likes to tell me that I inherited the gift of gab from him, and my father can talk your ear off. We probably all experience that with someone in our families that's close to us. I think hard on perspective. In this day and age especially, you look around our world with social media and the way that the news is delivered and all these kind of things these days, the headline is one thing, but there's very little perspective in a headline. And I think perspective is important. So, example, the last chance qualifying on Sunday. And Jack Harvey's out there in that last ditch run. And all of a sudden, his third lap comes back faster than Ray Hall's third lap. And, you know, they read out the time and the speed is, whoa, wait a minute, we're on to something here. We're on to, that was faster than Ray Hall's third lap, so hang on, this is going to be close. Without that perspective, those numbers would have meant nothing to you. And so the perspective on everything is really important. And I had the benefit of working for some great people in my career that taught me a lot. When I took that job in Washington, D.C., where I wasn't on the air, one of the programs they syndicated was The Larry King Show. Before you knew Larry from CNN, Larry did a national radio show, right? Midnight to 5:30 a.m. And he interviewed all kinds of people. And Larry didn't want any prep for anybody.
Wow.
He wanted his natural curiosity to dictate the interview. And Larry one time told a group of us that were hanging with him, he said, a good interview question only begins with one of two words: how or why. 1985, I still try every time I do question somebody about something, how or why. And Keith Jackson, television legend. Right, television legend. Yeah. Keith used to say, amplify, clarify, punctuate. Those are the three keys to being good at play-by-play.
My guy that I went to living in the Northeast in New Jersey at the time with Charlie Roberts was Chris Economaki.
Yep.
Didn't know the guy at all. Made a phone call to him. I said, would you mind having lunch with me? He said yes. I figured no.
He said yes, he minded having lunch, or yes, that he would.
That's the way I read
it. And maybe he did, but he had lunch with me anyways.
Stout ran him down.
Ironically enough, at a diner that his granddaughter was working at. But I remember him asking me, "What are you doing now?" And I said, "I'm calling drag races." And and I wanted to get on the TV side of it. And he said, "Describe to me the start of a drag race." And I did. And I'm thinking he's quizzing me on my knowledge, So I lay it all out in full detail as best I know how. Yeah. He said, "Now you've got to do that in 20 seconds."
Right.
So that was the first tip that I got from Chris Economaki.
Exactly. The fewer words I say, the more impact the words that I say have. That's Michael's heard me say that before, right? That's an overriding mantra. If you're just blabbing on and on and on, the fewer words I say, the more impact the words I do say have. And they get paid on Thursday, so I better get some of their money Thursday night before they spend it all, and they can't come on Saturday.
Welcome back to The Skinny. It's been a great show here, listening to one of the absolute best broadcasters of our day, and Allen Bestwick, who's joined us here in the studio. Allen, going back into the mid-'80s, you make your way onto MRN. You find that opportunity where somebody is short and they put you on the air. You worked there for a little bit, and then how long was it before you took over for Ken Squire at TBS?
Well, it was sometime. Mid-1990s, I got some opportunities to do some television. And that led, TBS at that time had 5 races a year. Ken's company produced those races for TBS. They had 5 races a year, and they hired me to be a pit reporter. And so two Charlottes, 2 Poconos, and I forget what the other one was, but 5 races. And I worked with Ken and learned television from Ken. And you could have some amazing conversations with him about what was important, what wasn't, how a television production works. And then I don't even remember the exact year, truthfully, Ken, but at some point, TBS came to me and said, "Hey, we're going to put you in the booth now." Okay, that's awkward. It's interesting. Of course, I'm going to say yes. It's opportunity. But he's one of my idols and mentors, and it was awkward. But we've had a great relationship. He's a wonderful man. I can't wait till I get to go up to his racetrack this summer with SRX and hopefully get a chance to catch up to him.
What track is?
Thunder Road International Raceway in Barrie, Vermont, where they race every Thursday night all summer long because, this is a Ken story I'm borrowing, because the big industry locally is a rock quarry and they get paid on Thursday. So I better get some of their money Thursday night before they spend it all and they can't come on Saturday. That's a Ken story.
Spoken like a true promoter.
That's a Ken Squire story.
Real quick, Allen, we kind of moved into the television portion of your career, but I always thought it interesting. We were talking about this one day. I think my inspiration to get into radio broadcasting as far as racing goes was the MRN broadcast. When you were there and earlier, just that whole era of MRN. Just run down the names that you had the opportunity to work with over those years.
We used to call MRN the University of Racing Broadcasting, because everybody that works in NASCAR television pretty much came from MRN or started there. Start with Barney Hall. 1959 started broadcasting NASCAR races on the radio, right?
Wow.
Wonderful gentleman, very modest, no interest in fame, passionate interest in doing right by the racers and the race fans. Barney Hall, Mike Joy, Jackaroo, Ned Jarrett, Jerry Punch, Eli Gold. These were the guys I came in with.
Oh, yeah.
Dick Brooks, Jim Phillips, Winston Kelly, this whole group. And so I say this, I believe I said this earlier too, but repeat your best stuff. I've been so blessed to be surrounded by great people and be part of great teams my whole career. And think about that team and being part of that broadcast on Sundays. It was just so much fun. We knew what we were doing was good, not arrogantly, but because we worked at it. And we were held to a high standard by each other.
I was just going to say, I mean, what really drives you is a competitive nature.
Yeah.
When you're around people that are working really hard, the last thing you want to do is be the weak link.
That's right.
And consequently, you dig in.
Yeah. And everybody did. Everybody worked. We worked hard. We played hard. I used to tease some people that I spent more time with them than I did with my wife, which was actually true.
I was going to say there's probably some truth to that.
The racer's life, right? And but just dear friends, great memories, and great learning. Just a great team.
It's great stuff. As I was reading through the career, obviously touching on you getting started with TV, and then you migrated to NBC. It seems like what was the perfect time, and a year later they get the contract, but you're working with Benny Parsons, you're working with Wally Dallenbach, you're working with Bill Weber. Again, some of the biggest names in the game.
Great team. There's a story, and I don't know that we have time for it, but I'm going to tell it anyway. So NBC signs up to do one race a year, because at the time the individual speedways had their own broadcast rights. They're going to bring a cup race to Homestead Miami Speedway. NBC is going to televise it. One race a year. All right, so Mike's under contract to CBS, and this one's under contract to that, and this one. Well, Allen's kind of available. He's a radio guy. He does some TV work too. He does TBS. He's available. So I kind of fell into the NBC job. And before we did that first race, in the middle of that race weekend, we're sitting in a restaurant having dinner with the executive producer of NBC Sports at the time, Tommy Roy, and the 4 or 5 others of us of the team. And Terry Lingner walks into the room. Now, Terry is going to produce that NBC weekend.
From Indianapolis, by the way.
Yep, and producer of ESPN for years, and coordinating producer, guy that had a lot to do with racing television. And Terry walks into the room and sees us all, he says, "Hey, Tommy, congratulations. I hear you got the deal." And Tommy's face just goes blank. And we're all going like, nobody's supposed to know about this. They're going to announce it like in 2 days. But yes, we have a half season of NASCAR for the next 7 years or 6 years. So like a couple hours later, we're sitting in the hotel bar, and I'm sitting there with maybe a little brown liquid in one hand and a cigar in the other, with the executive producer of NBC Sports. Great guy, by the way, one of the best people I ever worked for. And I'm just sitting there thinking, can't make this stuff up.
Back to what we said in the beginning of the interview, timing is everything.
I'm just a kid from Rhode Island with no high school diploma. You can't make
awesome.
this stuff up, And sure enough, off we went.
Wow. It was incredible, man. As I read through here, and again, we'll touch on it in our last segment as well, but just the bobbing and weaving, being in the right place at the right time. You can work really hard and never get anywhere. Mm-hmm. You worked really hard. You got the gig, but then you worked really hard to keep the gig. It bobs to NBC, and then NBC it goes away from, and where do? You migrate right with it to ESPN, and we'll touch on that when we come back.
The way that race is unfolding in the last laps, and boom, a red flag, which shocked so many people in the IndyCar world. This is normal for NASCAR, but shocked so many people. Now we're going to restart, and we're going to have this scrap to the finish.
The Skinny is brought to you by Fatheads Eyewear. Fatheads Eyewear, hardcore since '04. And American Coach. American Coach, innovation is our life force.
Welcome back once again to the Fatheads Eyewear Studios here in Speedway, Indiana. This is The Skinny. We have the talented Allen Bestwick on the show with us here today, walking us through his amazing career, at least bits and pieces of it. We talked about you getting into NBC and how that came about. What a wonderful story there. And NBC loses their NASCAR deal. ESPN picks it up. You grab that and move along. 2008 to 2010, though, man, you got really busy. All of the NASCAR races, you had been a pit reporter, you were in the booth, you were doing a Monday roundtable. This thing really took off.
And we loved it, right? Doing what you love. And surrounded by a great group of people, wonderful teammates and friends to this day, so many of them. It was just smiling and laughing as we go, working hard too. I mean, I don't make light of how hard we worked and the strain the travel was on our families and that kind of thing. But I mean, we did 42 weeks a year of racing, because that contract was ESPN had all of the what's now Xfinity Series races, the whole season. So we started at Daytona and went to Homestead, and then we picked up the Cup Series in late July. So it was 42 weeks of racing, and I did 41 of the 42 weeks.
Wow.
So, what was your toughest call?
Toughest call. You never like to see people get hurt.
Right.
I would say the toughest day was the day Dale Earnhardt died, and I wasn't even on the air. I was there watching. Fox was broadcasting the race, and my phone rang, and it was NBC saying, "You're on the clock now. You're going to report on this." And I reported on it the next several days for MSNBC, too. Probably during a race, the Xfinity race at Daytona, they had a crash coming to the finish line, and parts of a car got into the grandstand, and there were spectators that were hurt, and we could see it right in front of us. My sister was in the grandstand.
Oh, wow.
Not far away. And I knew that. But, you know, cell service being what it was then, and so you're not going to get her on the phone or text, you know. And we went from covering the exciting finish of a race to literally becoming a news operation. We had reporters dispatched to the hospital. We were on Sports Center for hours. We ended up on World News Tonight. And I think we left the racetrack finally at like 8 p.m. and had to be back the next morning at 7 to go on Good Morning America and report more on the story. So days like that, you know, but, and this will sound weird, but this is the reality of our sport versus most. Every year when we would come to the Indy 500, we had this big, huge production meeting back at the hotel on Friday after Carb Day was done. And my bit in that meeting was always to say to our team, because we would always have some new people on the team, young people on their way up through ESPN, that kind of thing, say, okay, bad things happen. They can happen. They're rare, but they can happen. You might see some things in front of you on a monitor. You might see some things on a tape machine. We might be dealing with unpleasantness. What's your role in us reporting on that appropriately, accurately, respectfully? What's your role? Any questions? Let's talk about it. You may never, ever encounter that in your entire career. You might encounter it Sunday. It's the blunt reality of it. And thankfully, we haven't had to deal with that in a long time. Hopefully, we don't have to ever deal with it again.
And Dixon talking about when he wrecked at Indy, you know, when he was upside down, you know, when him and Jay Howard got together, and we had him talk through the whole thing, and it was absolutely amazing. I mean, like what's going through their mind that whole time.
And it's only seconds.
How fast their brains are working. It's hyper speed.
He's like, if we could just land it right here, this is going to be okay. And I mean, I'm like, I've just been, my eyes have been closed.
To lighten it up a little bit,
please
give us a more memorable, most memorable race or exciting race, or if you had to pick a race out that comes to mind.
Here's the funny thing. I don't take a lot away from races because I'm a very forward-looking, you know, as soon as the checker flag waves on this one, we got to start prepping for the next one, right? But the stories around the races, I take with me forever. Funny things that happened, places we went, things we did, you know. But probably I would say to you one of my most memorable races specifically was that first Indianapolis 500 I did for ABC, which was 2014, with Hunter Ray and Helio Castroneves. And the way that race is unfolding in the last laps, and boom, a red flag, which shocked so many people in the IndyCar world. This is normal for NASCAR, but shocked so many people. Now we're going to restart. We're going to have this scrap to the finish. And the pure joy of the celebration for Ryan and his family, that one has stuck with me for a long, long time.
It was a pretty amazing ending to the day. Because it was
my first Indy 500. I get a finish like that, you know,
Yeah.
and everybody's on, you know, on this bubble of happy leaving the place, maybe except Elio. And, you know, couldn't have asked for more.
Elio came back and got his.
He
so
did
it's
okay, yeah. He did okay.
he seems to be figuring it out.
He's doing okay. Hey, man, we really appreciate you taking the time to come over here and sit with us in our little humble studio here. And reading about your career is quite an inspiration. Thank you for what you do, how you do it, the amount of work that you put in to bring us the information that we don't know when we're watching and listening to a broadcast, and the way you deliver it. Absolutely second to none. You're an amazing talent for sure.
I appreciate it, Ken. Rico, it's fun. And just like I said, I'm just a lucky dude surrounded by a lot of great people. They make me look good.
Ladies and gentlemen, hope you enjoyed the show. Now you have a little bit of the skinny on this amazing broadcaster. We'll see you next week.